Hi, my name is Jim Brule, and I'm a Maggid, a Jewish inspirational storyteller. And I have a story for you today that is one of my favorites. I can't tell you the title of the story because, as you'll see, it would give it away. There once was a Hassid, a disciple of the Rebbe of Koznitz. And he was a very good man, and his wife was a very good woman, and yet they suffered, as so many do in these stories, from their inability to have a child. They both felt that their lives would be complete if only they could have a child, and yet none was coming. And the wife would ask the husband to go to the Rebbe and ask him for some kind of intervention, some kind of prayer or potion, anything to let them have children. But the Hassid was nervous about that. He really didn't want to go. And so he kept putting her off. But she kept pleading with him, and finally said, "Look, if you won't go, I will." Well, the Hassid was too embarrassed to let that happen, so he went. And he sat down in the office of the Rebbe, who knew, of course, that he was childless, and he poured out his heart. He said, "Rebbe, I want to have a child. My wife wants to have a child. Can't you please help us?" And the Rebbe thought about it. He said, "Well, I can tell you part of it. I can tell you that in order for you to have children, you and your wife will have to make a tremendous sacrifice. You'll have to throw yourselves into poverty and be separated for a great period. Beyond that, I can only tell you who knows the answer. But you and your wife must agree first that this is worth it." So the Hassid went back to his wife, and she was, of course, whatever it takes. And so they both made their way to the Rebbe. And as they sat down and the Rebbe realized that they were both in agreement, he said, "Listen, I don't have the answer. But the seer of Lublin, that fantastic Rebbe who can see the past and the future, I know that he has your answer. And I can tell you one more thing, that you will need to sell everything you own. You," he said to the man, "you must take all the proceeds of that sale, not lose a single ruble from it, and take it to the seer of Lublin. And you," he said to the wife, "you must live with your family until he returns. And God willing, your husband will be able to fill the mission and you will be able to have children." Well, it was a hard decision. They both wanted children, but it was such a price. But they agreed. And so he sold everything that he owned, and she threw her belongings in as well, and they ended up with a purse of 300 pieces of silver, a tremendous amount of money. She went to live with her family, and he headed off to Lublin. The words of the Rebbe ringing in his mind that he has to take all of it there. So he traveled by foot. He didn't hire a carriage. He slept by the side of the road. He begged for food. It took several days for him to get there. But finally he made it to the seer's office. He waited patiently for the door to open, but it didn't. Finally, the seer's wife came through and brought a meal to her husband. A few minutes later, the door opened for the Hassid. He sat there in front of the seer of Lublin, who was still reading, and he waited patiently. And he waited until finally the seer looked up at him and said, "I know why you're here. You don't even remember her name, do you?" Well, Hassid was confused. Of course he knew his wife's name. He said, "Yes, it's Sarah." "Not your wife." "Miriam." "Miriam? See, I told you. You don't even remember her name. Miriam." "Miriam." "Yes. The young woman to whom you were betrothed as a youth, whose betrothal you broke, you abandoned her. You left her. You didn't even think of her. You moved on. You married another woman. Of course you can't have children. You broke a vow." "Well, what can I possibly do?" "You must find Miriam. You must approach her and beg her forgiveness. And only if she forgives you your broken vow will a soul be released so that you may have a child." "Well, how will I ever get her to forgive me?" "That would be your problem." When the seer returned to his studies, it was clear his time was over. He walked out of the office, that bag of silver somehow even heavier in his hand. He asked around as to where he might find this woman. Nobody knew her. It had been years since he had seen her. But there was a great fair that happened every year a few miles away in Balta. And he thought, well, I'll go there and perhaps I'll find her there. And then when he arrived, it was the first day of the fair. It lasted for almost a week. And he asked around, "Have you seen Miriam?" He said, "Have you seen Miriam?" "Miriam? Oh, I don't know any Miriam." "You mean..." No. Nobody knew her. And still he kept that bag of silver intact, didn't spend a single bit of it. Again, sleeping in the gutter, begging for food, shivering in the occasional rain. Rain on the last day of the fair. The rain came down in buckets. Everyone was driven indoors, except one woman off there in the distance. A fine, elegantly dressed woman with a maidservant. And somehow he thought, maybe that's her. And as he started to approach her, being drenched in the rain that came down, he heard her voice in disgust. "There he is. I'll bet he doesn't even remember my name." The Hassid's heart had turned in all these weeks of fasting and repentance. And so it wasn't with joy that he finally reached her, but with abject sorrow. He fell to his knees and he says, Miriam, Miriam, I've wronged you. So long ago, but I've wronged you. She looked down at him. Yes, you have. Miriam, I need to beg your forgiveness. And to be truthful, it's for me and my wife. You married? Yes, I did. But because of my broken vow, we can't have children. Miriam, I know I have no right to ask you for this, but please, would you forgive me? She looked down at him. You do seem sincere. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, just forgive me for the injury I did to you and for what it has cost me. Perhaps you are sincere. I'll tell you what, my brother, he lives a few miles away. And he's come on desperate times. His daughter is ready to be married. Much was I. But he has no money for the dowry. They've made a good match, but he has no money. Go find him. Pay the dowry. And I'll know your repentance is sincere. When you pay him, I will forgive you. And she turned to her handmaid, and they started to walk away. The Hassid, his head fell to the wet earth in gratitude. Who knows how long he stayed that way, but when he lifted his head, she was already gone. And so he made his way down the road she'd indicated. Again, now knowing what this sack of silver was for. Finally, he reached the town some days later, and he asked around for her brother. He found him quickly enough. Everyone knew the brother of Miriam, whose daughter couldn't be married. He sought him out, and there he was, sitting by the side of the road, desolate. And the Hassid said to him, I understand your daughter needs to be wed, but she has no dowry. The man said, yes. Are you to jeer at me too? No. I have a gift for you. How much, tell me, is the dowry? It's a fine man. It's 300 pieces of silver. It's beyond my means. The Hassid raised his bag. He said, by the grace of God, I have that amount with me, and it's yours. Why would you give that to me? I don't know you. No, but I'm doing this as a favor for your sister. For my sister? Yes. She asked me to come and pay the dowry. How can that be? Said, What do you mean? She asked me. Well, what took you so long? Well, it's 3 days from Balta. Well, yes, that's true, but when did you speak to her? Just then. Just then I left Balta after speaking to her and came to you. You're a liar. She's been dead for 10 years. And in that moment, they both heard her voice saying, I forgive you. Well, the Hassid stayed a few days longer so that he could be fed and meet the young bride-to-be. And then he returned home. And he and his wife were able to conceive. And she bore him first a daughter, and they named her Miriam.